I thought it would be nice to start on a point of agreement and maybe explore our other views a little bit, because we're both, I think, left libertarians. And I'm curious because I think I don't really understand your libertarianism.
You just emailed me a second ago. I'm just checking now. You just emailed me with a line that began like, "This is why I'm a social conservative." How are you a left libertarian?
Well, I'm a social conservative, but when it comes to economics, I think that we should redistribute wealth. I actually think it's essential to have, people stay with their kids, raise their kids without having to necessarily stick them in public school, put their parents in nursing homes, just so they can work for corporate America.
Well, I mean, I think families should stick together. I certainly agree with that. I don't think that's necessarily a socially conservative position.
I think it is. I think that families have become we have the breakdown not just of the family, but of community. People used to go to churches, people used to have communal, all kinds of things. And even the family, what you think of this as the family is the nuclear family. But that itself was a result of families used to be larger. Marriages used to be involving parents, the entire village, tribe. So it was very different.
Well, I think there are a lot of urbanist leftists who agree that we need to rebuild social spaces to encourage people to interact more with their immediate community, and how the nuclear family is bad and that multi-generational households can be good. I think if that's social conservatism, then there's probably a lot of actual overlap in desirability there.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so I want to get into maybe gender issues as well as children and even the elderly, because it's all ages that suffer from sort of this end result, I suppose, of this experiment, this liberal experiment. And both sexes have to work long hours, 10 hours a day sometimes, in order to just pay for good housing. Used to be one guy could do that on one paycheck because the norms were different. So if everyone floods the labor pool, that depresses wages. That's one of the reasons. And then corporate America loves it because they got more people working for them. Corporate America sold this idea that climbing the corporate ladder is actualizing yourself. And this is now the new meaning of life for many people.
Can we possibly not find a way to deal with corporate America that doesn't involve stripping economic rights from women? I'm sure there has to be a way to address these problems without forcing women back into the home. I mean, if you want there to be single income families and to be able to afford to live off of a single income, which I think is just fine, I don't think that's necessarily a socially conservative goal, because all you're talking about is raising wages, right? It doesn't have to be a gender thing.
Right. I think you'll find me very different than many conservatives, because I agree with raising wages.
So if the goal is for people to work less and to be paid more, I guess I just don't understand where this is socially conservative. I mean, no Republican is advocating for this, and tons of progressives are. It's fully in alignment with left values.
That's why I call myself a left libertarian, but socially. See, social conservatism is about questioning the liberalization that's going on. People aren't happier. And a lot of times what this country does, other countries do this too, but United States especially, they medicate you downstream of the problem. For example, ADHD, okay? And the one that, everybody seems to focus on now is gender dysphoria and many other things. It's upstream. A lot of the problems can be fixed if you actually look at society. But what people do is they medicate them. They give the ADHD kids amphetamines, Adderall, Ritalin, and they say, okay, take these, and this will deal with your problem. It won't, because the problem is structural. It's systemic. We have to think systemically.
I have ADHD, and it does fix the problem, actually.
Yeah, but does it fix the underlying societal problem?
Well, my ADHD isn't caused by a societal problem. My ADHD is just a product of an imbalance in my brain chemistry, but taking Adderall fixes the issue.
You see, that's what they like to say in every case. Depression. They used to say, oh, it's a chemical imbalance in your brain. Until 2022, studies showed that, in fact, it is not necessarily the case. Meta studies have shown that the SSRI, the inhibitors for the SRI, is actually oftentimes like a placebo. It doesn't actually, it's not the thing that is the cause of depression. And similarly with ADHD, what if I gave you a much more in-your-face answer, and maybe once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it? Would you like that?
Sure, go right ahead. I mean, I don't deny that there can be social causes to
All right.
to people's you know, mental conditions or whatever. But that doesn't mean that mental conditions aren't real, like extigent those things, you know? Maybe, for instance, there are some social environmental causes to autism. That's probably the case. It's almost certainly the case. But if a person has autism, you know, that's that. They should be treated as a person with autism. And it doesn't mean that there aren't people who wouldn't have had autism anyway.
Yes, these actual things are downstream of real societal and chemical problems. So to go back to ADHD, here's what happens. We stick our kids in public school, and public school is dominated by teachers who have to, you know, watch their ass, cover their ass. So, and the administrators too. They don't love the kids the way that their parents do, but their parents are not there. So kids are either raised by the street or they're raised by the school administrator, and the school administrator sees the kid. What do they want to do? They need the kids to sit down and be quiet for 8 hours a day. And so boys struggle with this the most. And what they call ADHD, see, it's society placing their kids in essentially a prison for 8 hours a day and then picking them up to keep them out of trouble while they go and work, both the man and the woman. That's the issue.
Okay, so there's a lot here, and I'm not entirely sure where it connects to social conservatism. But I will say confidently that I think public education is a good thing, and it's basically the only way we've been able to enjoy post-industrial revolution level civil society. I don't know what alternative there could possibly be to public education as a way of mass educating everyone. ADHD certainly existed beforehand. Maybe people are getting it more often these days. I certainly agree that our school system is desperately in need of updating. But yeah, I just I don't know how this necessarily ties into like a socially conservative agenda. What do you want to change about the world? Specifically, I mean.
Oh, so much. Well, I'll tell you about the solutions, but you just mentioned Industrial Revolution. You're essentially the model, right, to train kids to be corporate drones or sit down for 10 hours and so on. This is exactly the industrial model, the factories, and that's what they had in England. So what you're having today, you can't think of a better way. This is modeling it on essentially 19th century industrial revolution in England. We can go way past that. So in that way, I'm a progressive, right? I want a UBI. I want online courses. I want an AI tutor for everybody. I mean, it's easy now.
Isn't it contradictory that we open this by talking about the dehumanization of social spaces and the fact that people are interacting less? And now you're suggesting we replace one of the most consistent, like, social environments that people are raised in, school, by being taught by an AI model with no feelings or personality?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. See, we've already failed in a lot of our things. And I would love to go to other issues as well, but just to stay on this one. We failed in the way that we organize society. I mean, I remember there's a Cadillac commercial, 2014. It's like, why do we work so hard? Why don't we take August off? It's because we're hardworking achievers. That's why. And they're trying to like praise, you know, the fact that Americans love to say, I have no free time.
Wait, but
imagine people saying, I'm so poor. I love it. I have
but you're
no
not
money.
Addressing what I said, though.
Right, technology.
Well, why would anyone want to be taught by an AI?
Well, technology is the great empowering force that has been throughout the 20th century. You use computers, personal computers, you use printers, and so on, electricity. All of these things democratized access. Then I remember I was a kid, it was like $1 a minute to call long distance. Now it's free because of voice over IP. So like the technology takes the cost to zero. Why wouldn't we take advantage of that? You know, obviously.
Okay, but again, like, so what are you suggesting specifically? That every child be required to be given a Chat GPT lesson for 4 hours a day?
I don't believe in requirements. I think people want to help their kids. The first thing I would do is give everyone a UBI. The UBI goes into circulation based on people's needs. If you want to get Gillette razors, you go ahead and do that. If you want to get an online course for your kid, you do that. But the main thing is you don't work 10 hours a day. You each work much less and you spend time with your kids, which is what the kids actually need.
But the reason that we have compulsory education is because leaving it up to the parent is actually a really bad idea. Because there are shitty parents. And if you don't get an education as a child, you're kind of fucked. In order to keep up with modern society, you need a pretty robust education that spans a good portion of your life. And if your parents just don't give that to you because they're ideologically opposed, indifferent, lazy, hateful, whatever, you're just fucked. Like you would have a society full of 18-year-old illiterates whose parents just for some reason or another did not think it worthwhile to educate their children via AI, which I still haven't really gotten an answer to how that would work.
Look at the Salman Khan
and it would be
lecture.
a net detriment.
Individualized instruction. Well, look, okay, there's a couple directions I can take this, but the one that's more interesting to me is you say you're a libertarian, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you do believe that people should have the freedom to choose how to spend their time or how, what to spend their money on and stuff like that?
Within limits. I mean, we both believe in taxation, as you've described. That would be taking their money. They wouldn't need to give me permission to do that if I ran the government.
I don't necessarily believe in taxation the way it's done today. I would abolish the individual income tax completely.
You just said a progressive tax.
Yeah, on corporations. I wouldn't tax individuals just for working. I mean, that's ridiculous.
I mean, I don't think it's ridiculous. The state is the one printing the currency, so it makes sense that it would tax the currency.
I don't want the state to print the currency. I'm in favor of currencies being issued by smaller entities, like a neighborhood or a city.
Why would anyone accept a currency that was printed in an adjacent neighborhood?
Why would anyone accept a currency
that was printed in an adjacent neighborhood? Why would you break it down into so many different currencies? The point of a currency is that it's meant to be a divisible exchange unit of worth.
A great question. Well, you happen to be speaking to someone who's built a company called Intercoin, which deals with this exact problem. Why would anyone use the internet, and why would they use an adjacent network or some network around the world? Because they're all interoperating.
But we're talking about currency. The point of currency is that it can be backed up by the perceived value of state power, or of if it's fiat currency, of a given amount of gold or whatever else. I mean, it has to be backed by something. But if it's just a neighborhood currency, why would that be used? I mean, we saw
this idea that
we saw examples of this with like the Holy Roman Empire, right? Where like every little kingdom and fiefdom would issue its own currency. But
you don't have to go that far.
It was a mess.
In this country, they had the free banking era where every bank would issue its own banknotes. So this existed in the 19th century until the government, you say backing, you know what the government does? It uses violence. It sends in the men with guns. And unlike those other libertarians you talked to.
Okay, wait, you know what those banks in the 19th century did to assure the strength of their currency, right?
A lot of those banks failed, actually.
Okay, yeah, yes. I know, because that system is terrible. But do you know what they did to secure the value of their currency?
They didn't give out crazy loans to people who couldn't pay them back.
They also relied on violence.
Look, the entire system relies on violence. The capitalist system relies on violence no less than the communist, so-called, or socialist systems. They just enforce it differently. So they would evict people from their houses for non-payment. If the person refused to leave, the same men with guns say, well, the bank says it belongs to this absentee landlord, so you're out. Look, I mean, we in this country passed laws to protect them.
I feel like we're like 17 layers deep on a question, because the question was about AI teaching children, and then it was the effects of children not receiving an education because their parents didn't give them one. And then you asked me if I'm a libertarian, and now we're talking about...
you're a libertarian who believes that the state should use violence in order to back up the currency.
As you said, all systems use violence.
Yeah, but you're trying to use a concentration of power. Let me be clear, because I want to understand the basics. This time I want to understand your viewpoint. My viewpoint is that I am suspicious of any concentration of power. So for me, I'm consistent. I want to decentralize power. I want to give
decentralized violence.
I guess, but lesser violence, right? The violence that, sends people to war, the violence that commits a genocide would not be as possible if there was no center. It could just say, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to kill all the Jews.
Well, that's usually what happens is you have a bunch of smaller feudal lords, and then one of them gets strong and takes power, and then they do become the centralized violence. In the absence of a mediator like the state, you're describing a bunch of petty warlords, one of whom will eventually be stronger than the others.
I would reduce the state to one specific function, and that function is exactly preventing the violence from happening in the first place. For example, I would have a world police rather than armies. So yes, you're right that when it comes to violence, that one thing you do need to it would be nice to have a monopoly on violence. Yes, but that monopoly has to be carefully kept in check with checks and balances. So the world police would not be the United States. It would be more like the UN peacekeeping force or something.
Yeah, so you're describing a world government, which I'm in favor of.
Well, again, I am not describing an all-encompassing world government as you seem to do with the world currency and that can cut you off, that you can't buy anything anywhere in the world, with a social credit system that will punish you gradually.
I'm not in favor of a social credit system.
Okay, so then I ask you practically, how are you going to prevent a world government that has all the guns and all the power and controls the currency like we'll have with the CBDCs and the national IDs? How will you prevent in your world? You say government is the only way. So we're going to be living in, it's going to be their world. We just live in it, and they could cut us off at any point.
Well, the point is that it's a democratic society that's highly federalized with systems that allow for individual participation at a local level, kind of like what we have in the United States. So it's not really their world, right? Like, America isn't Joe Biden's America. Joe Biden represents a conglomerate of interests, largely an oligarchical one, but that's why I advocate for socialism, because I believe that under a proletarian state, you could have an elected leader who would represent proletarian interests.
Yeah, and every single time people have these rosy things, name me one country. You're just like the laissez-faire libertarians. Name me one country where this has worked. Name me one country that has stably had a nice, benevolent democracy that is never corrupted and never took power.
Stably had, for how long? There are multiple democracies.
You're saying it could be forever or something, because as soon as your democracy is taken over, hey, weren't you opposed to the Trump January 6th
well, I'm sorry, are you asking me to construct a form of government that is perfect and will never fail no matter what?
I'm not, well, I don't have to do that because I want to strip the government of most of its functions, right? Except for the one where it prevents one group from massacring another group.
Except you would just create a system of warlords. But yeah, no, most democracies in the world today, at least like, Western democracies, have been more or less stable for a time. I don't think there's any system of government or any system of non-government that can ever be considered perfectly stable, like forever. I don't think that's a real thing.